Sarah's heart stopped as her husband's voice, absent for months, crackled through the phone. His desperate plea shattered her world and thrust her into a dangerous game of international intrigue she never could have imagined. Sarah Thompson's world shattered with a single phone call. The shrill ring pierced the quiet of her suburban home, echoing through rooms that had felt empty for far too long. Her trembling hand reached for the receiver, a gnawing sense of anticipation twisting her stomach. "Hello?" Her voice wavered, barely above a whisper. "Sarah? It's me." The familiar voice, tinged with desperation, sent a jolt through her body. Michael, her husband, missing for months, presumed dead by some, now, impossibly, on the other end of the line. "Michael? Where are you?" "What? Listen, I don't have much time," he cut in, his words rushed and urgent. "I'm in trouble. Big trouble. I'm in prison, Sarah, in Eastern Europe. They're saying I committed a crime, but I swear to you, I'm innocent." Sarah's mind reeled, struggling to process the flood of information. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, reality bending and warping around her. Prison? But how? Why? "I can't explain everything now. They only gave me one phone call. Sarah, I need your help. You're the only one who can prove I'm innocent. Please, you have to believe me." "Of course, I believe you," Sarah said, her shock giving way to a fierce determination. "Tell me what to do. I don't know all the details yet, but start with Jack Reeves. He might be able to help navigate the legal system here. And Sarah, be careful. There are people who don't want the truth to come out. I have to go. I love you." The line went dead, leaving Sarah standing in her kitchen, the phone still clutched to her ear. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed deafening in the sudden silence. She lowered the receiver slowly, her mind a whirlwind of questions and fears. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her neatly manicured lawn. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. Children's laughter drifted from a nearby yard, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside Sarah. How could this be happening? Michael, her brilliant, kind-hearted husband, locked away in some foreign prison? It felt like a nightmare, but the lingering echo of his voice in her ear told her it was all too real. Sarah moved through the house in a daze, muscle memory guiding her as she made a cup of tea she knew she wouldn't drink. The kitchen, with its gleaming countertops and state-of-the-art appliances, suddenly felt alien. This was the home they had built together, a testament to their shared dreams. Now, it felt like a mocking reminder of everything that had been ripped away. She sank into a chair at the dining room table, her eyes falling on the framed photos lining the walls. Michael's smile beamed back at her from a dozen captured moments. Their wedding day, vacations, casual snapshots of everyday life. How had they gone from that happiness to this nightmare? The sound of the front door opening jolted Sarah from her reverie. "Mom, I'm home." Ethan, her 16-year-old son, appeared in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He froze when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. How could she possibly explain this to him? "Ethan, honey, sit down. There's something I need to tell you about your father." As she recounted the impossible phone call, she watched the emotions play across her son's face. Disbelief, hope, fear, anger. Ethan had been devastated by Michael's disappearance, withdrawing into himself in a way that broke Sarah's heart. "So he's alive? And we can get him back?" Ethan's voice cracked, a glimpse of the little boy he'd once been shining through. "We're going to do everything we can," Sarah promised, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "But it's not going to be easy. There's a lot we don't know yet." Ethan nodded, his jaw set in a determined line that reminded her so much of Michael. "What can I do to help? For now, just keep things as normal as possible. I'm going to need to make some calls, start figuring out our next steps." As Ethan retreated to his room, Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling to Jack Reeves' number. The lawyer had been a friend of the family for years, helping them with everything from real estate transactions to minor legal scrapes. She just hoped he was up for something of this magnitude. Jack answered on the third ring. "Sarah, is everything okay?" She almost laughed at the question. Nothing had been okay for months. "No, Jack, everything is very much not okay. I need your help. It's about Michael." 20 minutes later, Sarah had relayed the bare bones of the situation to an increasingly concerned Jack. "This is complicated, to say the least," he said, his usual confident tone tinged with uncertainty. "International law isn't my specialty, but I have some contacts who might be able to help." "Do you know which country he's in specifically?" Sarah's heart sank. "No, he just said Eastern Europe. It all happened so fast." "Okay, don't worry. That's something we can figure out." "Listen, Sarah, I know this is overwhelming, but we need to approach this methodically. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? We'll start putting together a plan of action." After hanging up, Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. The quiet neighborhood seemed oblivious to the storm raging in her heart. How many of her neighbors had written Michael off as dead, or worse, a deserter who had abandoned his family? The thought made her blood boil. A soft knock at the door interrupted her dark thoughts. She opened it to find Elena Petrova, their next-door neighbor, holding a casserole dish. "Sarah, I hope I'm not interrupting," Elena said, her slight accent a reminder of her Russian heritage. "I made too much dinner and thought you and Ethan might like some." The simple act of kindness nearly undid Sarah. She blinked back tears, managing a wobbly smile. "That's so thoughtful, Elena. Thank you." Elena's brow furrowed with concern. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." For a moment, Sarah considered brushing off the question, but something in Elena's warm, understanding gaze made her hesitate. Maybe it was her connection to Eastern Europe, or simply the fact that she had been a steady presence since Michael's disappearance. Whatever the reason, Sarah found herself inviting Elena inside. Over cups of tea that grew cold as they talked, Sarah poured out the whole incredible story. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "This is very serious," she said finally, her voice low. "The justice system in some of these countries, it's not like here. Corruption is rampant. If Michael has been falsely accused, it won't be easy to prove his innocence." Sarah nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "I know, but I have to try. He's counting on me." Elena reached across the table, clasping Sarah's hand. "You're not alone in this. I may not be able to do much, but I have family back in Russia. They might be able to help gather information, make some inquiries." For the first time since the phone call, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. "You do that?" "Of course. Michael is a good man, and you've been so strong through all of this. Let me help, please." As Elena left, promising to reach out to her contacts immediately, Sarah felt some of the paralysis that had gripped her begin to fade. She had allies. She had a starting point. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Sarah's mind raced with plans and possibilities. The empty space beside her seemed to mock her, a constant reminder of what she stood to lose if she failed. But beneath the fear and uncertainty, a steely resolve was taking root. "I'm coming for you, Michael," she whispered into the darkness. "Whatever it takes, I'm bringing you home." In the days that followed, Sarah's life took on a frenetic pace. Meetings with Jack Reeves became a daily occurrence, their discussions a whirlwind of legal jargon and strategic planning. She pored over maps of Eastern Europe, trying to narrow down Michael's possible location based on the scant information she had. Elena proved to be an invaluable ally, her connections providing a trickle of information that slowly began to paint a clearer picture. It was through one of Elena's cousins that they finally pinpointed Michael's location, a grim industrial city in a former Soviet republic. Its name a tangle of consonants Sarah struggled to pronounce. Each new piece of information brought both hope and fresh waves of anxiety. The charge against Michael, industrial espionage, seemed ludicrous. He was a software engineer, yes, but his work had always been above board. The idea of him as some kind of corporate spy was laughable, and yet someone had gone to great lengths to frame him. But who and why? As Sarah dug deeper, she began to uncover troubling inconsistencies in the case against Michael. Timestamps on security footage that didn't match up. Witness statements that contradicted known facts. It was like trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and the rest from different sets entirely. Through it all, Ethan watched his mother with a mixture of awe and concern. He had always known she was strong, but seeing her throw herself into this fight with such single-minded determination was something else entirely. He did what he could to help, taking on more responsibilities around the house and acting as a sounding board when Sarah needed to talk through her theories. But as the days turned to weeks, the toll of the constant stress began to show. Sarah lost weight, dark circles forming under her eyes from too many late nights poring over documents. The once immaculate house began to show signs of neglect, dishes piling up in the sink and laundry overflowing from hampers. It was Elena who finally intervened, showing up one Saturday morning with a determined look and a bag full of cleaning supplies. "Enough," she said firmly, steering Sarah towards the couch. "You won't be any good to Michael if you run yourself into the ground. Rest. I'll take care of things here." Sarah wanted to protest, but the moment her head hit the cushion, exhaustion washed over her like a wave. She drifted off to the sounds of Elena puttering around the kitchen, the scent of lemon cleaner filling the air. When she awoke hours later, the house was transformed. Sunlight streamed through freshly washed windows. The floors gleamed, and the air smelled of something delicious simmering on the stove. For a moment, just a moment, Sarah could almost pretend everything was normal, that Michael would walk through the door any minute, laughing about being late for dinner. The illusion shattered as reality came rushing back. But something had shifted. As Sarah joined Elena and Ethan in the kitchen, accepting a bowl of hearty stew, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would bring Michael home, not just for herself, but for all of them. Their little family, expanded now to include Elena, deserved its happy ending. That night, as she stood at the bedroom window gazing at the stars, Sarah made a silent vow. No matter what it took, no matter how far she had to go or what risks she had to take, she would uncover the truth. Michael's freedom, their future together, depended on it. And Sarah Thompson was nothing if not determined. Little did she know, her resolve was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. As the investigation into Michael's case deepened, Sarah found herself navigating a labyrinth of international bureaucracy and shadowy corporate interests. Each day brought new challenges, testing her resolve and pushing her to limits she never knew she possessed. Jack Reeves had come through with legal contacts in Eastern Europe, but progress was frustratingly slow. The language barrier alone was a constant struggle. With official documents arriving in languages Sarah couldn't read and translators charging exorbitant fees for their services. "We need someone on the ground there," Jack said during one of their daily meetings. His usually immaculate suit looking rumpled after hours of poring over case files. "Someone who can navigate the local system, ask the right questions." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing. "I'll go." Jack's eyebrows shot up. "Sarah, I don't think you understand how dangerous this could be. We're dealing with people who clearly have no qualms about framing an innocent man. If they realize you're digging into this, I don't care," Sarah said, her voice steel. "Michael needs me, and no one else is going to fight for him the way I will." Seeing the determination in her eyes, Jack sighed. "At least let me arrange for a local guide, someone who knows the terrain. And Sarah, be careful. This isn't like anything you've faced before." As Sarah prepared for her journey, she couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The more she learned about the company Michael had been working for when he disappeared, the more questions arose. Tech Fusion Industries had seemed like a dream opportunity when Michael first got the job, a cutting-edge tech firm with a focus on sustainable energy solutions. But now, Sarah was uncovering whispers of darker dealings beneath the surface. Late one night, as she sat at the kitchen table surrounded by stacks of documents, a name caught her eye. Viktor Sokolov, CEO of Tech Fusion's Eastern European division. Something about the way his name kept popping up in conjunction with redacted files and vague financial transactions set off alarm bells. A soft knock startled her from her thoughts. Elena stood in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "Sarah, it's past midnight. You need to rest." Single quotes. Sarah rubbed her eyes, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. "I know. I feel like I'm so close to something, Elena. Like all the pieces are there, but I can't quite see how they fit together." Elena moved to sit beside her, glancing at the papers strewn across the table. Her eyes widened as she saw Viktor Sokolov's name. "I know this man," she said softly. Sarah's head snapped up. "What? How?" Elena hesitated, a shadow passing over her face. "It was a long time ago, back in Russia. He was involved in some, let's say, questionable business dealings. Nothing that could ever be proven, of course. But there were rumors." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that get people hurt if they ask too many questions," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, if this man is involved in what happened to Michael, you need to be very, very careful." The warning only fueled Sarah's determination. As her departure date approached, she threw herself into preparations with renewed vigor. She studied maps of the city where Michael was being held, memorized key phrases in the local language, and pored over every scrap of information she could find about Tech Fusion and Viktor Sokolov. Ethan watched his mother's transformation with a mixture of pride and fear. The woman who had always been his rock, steady and dependable, now seemed to crackle with a fierce energy that both awed and frightened him. The night before she was set to leave, Sarah found Ethan in Michael's study, holding one of his old sweaters. The sight made her heart ache. "Hey," she said softly, sitting beside him on the leather sofa. "How are you holding up?" Ethan shrugged, his eyes fixed on the worn fabric in his hands. "I'm scared," he admitted. "For Dad, for you. What if something happens to you too?" Sarah pulled him close, feeling the tremor that ran through his lanky frame. "Oh, honey, I know it's scary, but I promise you, I'm going to do everything in my power to bring your dad home and come back safe. But what if you can't?" Ethan's voice cracked. "What if it's too dangerous?" Sarah took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, Ethan, we have to take risks for the people we love. Your dad would do the same for me in a heartbeat. But I promise you, I'm not going to do anything reckless. I have too much to come home to." As she held her son, Sarah silently renewed her vow. She would solve this mystery, clear Michael's name, and bring their family back together, no matter what it took. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Sarah's mood as she prepared to leave. Elena arrived early, insisting on driving her to the airport. "I'd made some calls," Elena said, as they navigated the quiet suburban streets. "My cousin Nikolai will meet you when you land. He's trustworthy, and he knows how things work over there. Listen to him, Sarah. His advice could save your life." Sarah nodded, grateful for Elena's help, but too wound up to fully express it. As they pulled up to the departures terminal, Elena grabbed her hand. "Be safe," she said, her eyes intense. "And remember, you're not alone in this. We're all here, fighting alongside you." With a final hug, Sarah stepped out into the misty morning, her small suitcase feeling impossibly heavy. As she made her way through security and towards her gate, the reality of what she was about to do began to sink in. She was leaving behind everything familiar, venturing into a world she barely understood, all on the strength of her love for Michael and her belief in his innocence. The flight was long and uncomfortable, giving Sarah too much time to dwell on her fears and doubts. What if she was wrong? What if Michael really had done something illegal? No, she pushed the thought away fiercely. She knew her husband. Whatever had happened, he was innocent. She had to believe that. As the plane began its descent, Sarah's anxiety ratcheted up. Through the small window, she could see a sprawling cityscape, gray and industrial. Somewhere down there, Michael was waiting. Somewhere down there, answers lurked. The airport was a chaotic mess of unfamiliar signs and rapid-fire announcements in a language Sarah couldn't understand. She clutched her bag tightly, scanning the crowd for the man Elena had described. Just as panic began to set in, she spotted him, tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard and piercing blue eyes. "Sarah Thompson?" he asked as she approached, his accent thick but his English clear. At her nod, he gave a grim smile. "I'm Nikolai. Welcome to hell." As they made their way through the crowded terminal, Nikolai spoke in a low, urgent tone. "Things are complicated. The official channels, they're all corrupted. If we're going to help your husband, we'll need to be creative and careful." Sarah listened intently, trying to absorb every detail. The city that unfolded around them as they left the airport was a far cry from her quiet suburban life. Towering Soviet-era apartment blocks loomed over crumbling sidewalks, while sleek modern office buildings rose like islands of glass and steel. Tech Fusion's main office is there, Nikolai said, pointing to a particularly imposing skyscraper. But that's not where we'll find our answers. The real power, it operates in the shadows. As they wove through traffic, Nikolai filled Sarah in on the complex web of relationships that governed the city's underworld. Politicians in the pocket of oligarchs, police chiefs who looked the other way for the right price, and always, the specter of organized crime lurking just beneath the surface. And Viktor Sokolov? Sarah asked, thinking of the name that had become a dark shadow in her mind. Where does he fit into all this? Nikolai's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Sokolov is dangerous. He has connections everywhere. If he's behind what happened to your husband, we'll need to tread very carefully. They pulled up to a nondescript apartment building, its facade gray and weathered. This is where you'll be staying, Nikolai said. It's not much, but it's safe. No one will look for you here. As Sarah settled into the small, sparse apartment, the enormity of what she had undertaken truly hit her. She was alone in a foreign country, about to go up against forces she barely understood, all for the sake of the man she loved. But as she unpacked her meager belongings, her hand brushed against something tucked into a side pocket of her suitcase. It was a photo, one she didn't remember packing. Michael's smiling face beamed up at her, his arm around her shoulders. On the back, in Ethan's messy scrawl, "Bring him home, Mom. We believe in you." Sarah clutched the photo to her chest, tears pricking at her eyes. Yes, she was far from home, facing impossible odds, but she wasn't truly alone. The love of her family, the support of friends like Elena, the unexpected alliance with Nikolai, all of it gave her strength. As night fell over the unfamiliar city, Sarah stood at the window, watching the lights flicker to life in countless windows. Somewhere out there, Michael was waiting. Somewhere out there, the truth lay hidden. "I'm here," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "And I'm not leaving without you." The next morning dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the dawning task ahead. Sarah woke early, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. She had barely slept, the unfamiliar sounds of the city keeping her on edge throughout the night. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Nikolai stood in the hallway, his expression grim. "We need to move quickly," he said without preamble. "I've arranged a meeting with someone who might be able to help us. But we have to be careful. This person is taking a big risk by talking to us." As they hurried through the bustling streets, Sarah's heart pounded. This was it, the first real lead in her quest to save Michael. Nikolai led her to a small, dimly lit cafe tucked away in a narrow alley. The smell of strong coffee and cigarette smoke hit her as they entered. In a corner booth, a woman sat hunched over a steaming mug. She looked up as they approached, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Quickly," she hissed. "Sit down." Nikolai made the introductions in hushed tones. "This is Irina. She works as a clerk at the courthouse where Michael's case is being processed." Sarah leaned forward eagerly. "Can you tell me anything about what's happening with his case?" Irina glanced around once more before speaking. "It's bad," she said bluntly. "The evidence against your husband, it looks very convincing, but there are irregularities, things that don't add up." "What kind of irregularities?" Sarah pressed. "Documents with timestamps that don't match, witness statements that changed overnight, and..." Irina hesitated, lowering her voice even further. "There's pressure coming from above. Someone powerful wants this case closed quickly, with your husband taking the fall." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Viktor Sokolov?" Irina's eyes widened in fear. "I didn't say that name," she said quickly. "You didn't hear it from me, but yes, his influence is all over this case." As they left the cafe, Sarah's mind was reeling. The confirmation of Sokolov's involvement made the situation even more dangerous, but it also gave her a target, someone to focus her efforts on. "What's our next move?" she asked Nikolai as they walked briskly back towards her apartment. He frowned, considering. "We need more concrete evidence of tampering, something that can't be ignored or swept under the rug." But getting that kind of proof, It won't be easy or safe. Sarah squared her shoulders. I don't care about safe. I care about saving my husband. Nikolai studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. The plan, as it turned out, was as audacious as it was dangerous. Using Irina's access and Nikolai's underground connections, they would attempt to infiltrate Tech Fusion's local headquarters. The goal? To find any evidence of the real culprits behind the industrial espionage Michael was accused of. As Sarah prepared for the risky operation, she couldn't help but think of Ethan back home. What would he say if he knew what she was about to do? But the thought of Michael, alone in a cell, steeled her resolve. She had come too far to back down now. The night of the infiltration was moonless, the streets shrouded in shadow. Sarah's heart raced as she followed Nikolai through a maze of back alleys towards the looming Tech Fusion building. They had managed to obtain security passes through one of Nikolai's less-than-legal contacts. But getting inside was only the first challenge. Remember, Nikolai whispered as they approached a side entrance. We're looking for anything related to Project Helios. That's the initiative Michael was working on when he disappeared. Sarah nodded, trying to calm her nerves. As they swiped their stolen passes and slipped inside, the enormity of what they were doing hit her. This wasn't like the safe, predictable life she had left behind. This was real danger, with real consequences if they were caught. The office was eerily quiet, the hum of electronics the only sound as they made their way through dimly lit corridors. Sarah's hands shook as she rifled through filing cabinets, searching for anything that might help Michael's case. Nikolai worked on hacking into a computer terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Suddenly, a noise from the hallway made them both freeze, footsteps growing closer. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she was sure it would give them away. Nikolai motioned frantically towards a supply closet, and they barely managed to squeeze inside before the office door opened. Through a crack in the door, Sarah watched in horror as a familiar face entered the room. Viktor Sokolov himself, looking impeccable in a tailored suit despite the late hour. He was speaking rapidly into a phone, his voice low and angry. Need to accelerate the timeline. Thompson's wife is becoming a problem. Yes, I know we framed him, but we can't risk her uncovering anything. Make it happen. Sarah's blood ran cold. Here was the proof she had been searching for. Direct confirmation of Michael's innocence from the mouth of the man who had framed him. But how could she use this information without revealing that she had been here? As Sokolov finished his call and left the room, Sarah and Nikolai emerged from their hiding place, both shaken but determined. We need to get out of here, Nikolai said urgently. But Sarah, we just got the break we needed. They made their escape, hearts pounding, the stolen information clutched tightly in Sarah's hand. As they hurried back through the darkened streets, Sarah's mind raced. They had proof now, but would it be enough? And more pressingly, how much danger were they in now that Sokolov knew she was becoming a problem? Back in the safety of her temporary apartment, Sarah finally allowed herself to break down. The stress, the fear, the sheer enormity of what she was up against, it all came crashing down at once. She sobbed, clutching the photo of Michael and Ethan to her chest. Nikolai, looking uncomfortable but determined, awkwardly patted her shoulder. You're doing well, he said gruffly. Better than most would in your situation. But Sarah, it's going to get harder from here. Are you sure you're ready for what comes next? Wiping her eyes, Sarah straightened up. The moment of weakness had passed, leaving behind a renewed sense of purpose. I'm sure, she said firmly. Whatever it takes, I'm bringing Michael home. As dawn broke over the city, Sarah and Nikolai began to formulate their next move. The information they had gathered was explosive, but using it would be tricky. They couldn't reveal how they had obtained it without incriminating themselves. We need leverage, Nikolai mused, pacing the small apartment. Something to force Sokolov's hand without revealing our own involvement. Sarah's mind raced, thinking back to everything she had learned about Tech Fusion and its operations. Suddenly, a memory clicked into place. Wait, she said, excitement building in her voice. Remember those financial irregularities we found? What if we could trace those back to Sokolov personally? Nikolai's eyes lit up. If we could prove he was embezzling from the company, Then we'd have a bargaining chip, Sarah finished. Something to make him think twice about pushing forward with the charges against Michael. It was a risky plan, fraught with potential pitfalls. But as they dove into the work of unraveling TechFusion's complex financial web, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, she could see a path forward, a way to bring Michael home. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the city, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She was no longer just a suburban teacher out of her depth. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman on a mission. And nothing, not Sokolov, not corrupt officials, not an ocean of distance, was going to stop her from reuniting her family. Little did she know, the most dangerous part of her journey was yet to come. The game was changing, the stakes rising. And somewhere in the shadows, Viktor Sokolov was planning his next move. As Sarah and Nikolai delved deeper into TechFusion's financial records, a complex web of deceit began to unravel before their eyes. Hidden accounts, shell companies, and a trail of suspicious transactions all pointed to a massive embezzlement scheme with Viktor Sokolov at its center. "This is bigger than we thought," Nikolai muttered, his eyes scanning line after line of damning evidence. "Sokolov isn't just framing your husband. He's been siphoning millions from the company for years." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. They had stumbled upon something huge, potentially game-changing, but with such high stakes came even greater danger. "We need to be careful how we use this information," she said, her mind racing. "If we go public, Sokolov might panic and do something drastic. We need to approach this strategically." Nikolai nodded grimly. "I have an idea, but it's risky. There's a journalist I know, someone who's been trying to expose corruption in the tech industry for years. If we can get this evidence to her, she might be able to apply pressure from a different angle." The journalist, Masha Volkova, proved to be a formidable ally, fierce and uncompromising. She took one look at the evidence Sarah and Nikolai had gathered, and her eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "This is explosive," she said, her voice low and intense. "But you're right to be cautious. Sokolov has friends in high places. We need to build an airtight case before we move over the next few days." Sarah found herself in a whirlwind of clandestine meetings and late-night strategy sessions. Monsieur's network of sources helped fill in the gaps in their evidence, painting a damning picture of corruption that reached far beyond just Sokolov and TechFusion. But as their case grew stronger, so did the sense that they were being watched. Strange cars lingered on street corners. Hushed phone conversations were cut short when Sarah entered a room. The feeling of eyes on her back became a constant companion. "They know we're onto something," Nikolai warned one evening, his face etched with worry. "We need to move fast, before they can cover their tracks." Sarah nodded, trying to ignore the knot of fear in her stomach. She thought of Michael, alone in his cell, and Ethan, waiting anxiously at home. She couldn't falter now, not when they were so close. The plan they formulated was daring, perhaps even foolhardy. Using the evidence they had gathered, they would confront Sokolov directly, offering him a choice: release Michael and confess to his crimes, or face exposure and ruin. As Sarah prepared for the confrontation, she couldn't help but reflect on how much she had changed since arriving in this foreign city. The timid suburban teacher was gone, replaced by a woman of steel, forged in the fires of adversity and determination. The meeting was set for a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Sarah arrived early, her heart pounding as she nursed a cup of bitter coffee. Nikolai and Masha were stationed nearby, ready to intervene if things went south. When Sokolov entered, his confident swagger faltered for just a moment as he saw Sarah waiting for him. "Mrs. Thompson," he said smoothly, sliding into the seat across from her. "To what do I owe this? Unexpected pleasure?" Sarah met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "I think you know why I'm here, Mr. Sokolov. It's time we talked about my husband and about your extracurricular activities at TechFusion." Sokolov's eyes narrowed, but he maintained his composure. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." Without a word, Sarah slid a folder across the table. As Sokolov flipped through the pages, his face drained of color. Financial records, emails, photographs, all pointing to his guilt. "This is preposterous," he sputtered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Where did you get this? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice low and intense. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Mr. Sokolov, a thief and a liar who framed an innocent man to cover his own crimes. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to release my husband and confess to what you've done. Otherwise, this information goes public. All of it." For a long moment, Sokolov said nothing, his eyes darting between Sarah and the damning evidence before him. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold with fury. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Mrs. Thompson. This goes far beyond me or your precious husband. There are forces at play here that you can't possibly understand." A chill ran down Sarah's spine, but she held her ground. "I don't need to understand everything. I just need to know that my husband is innocent and that you're guilty. The rest, well, that's for the authorities to sort out." Sokolov's laugh was harsh and humorless. "The authorities? My dear, I am the authorities in this godforsaken place. Your threats mean nothing." But Sarah could see the fear behind his bravado. She pressed her advantage. "Maybe so, but are you willing to bet everything on that? Your reputation, your freedom, your empire, all of it could come crashing down. Is it really worth the risk?" The tension in the air was palpable as Sokolov weighed his options. Sarah held her breath, acutely aware that everything, Michael's freedom, her family's future, perhaps even her own life, hung in the balance. Finally, Sokolov seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of him. "What exactly do you want from me?" Sarah's heart soared, but she kept her expression neutral. "As I said, release my husband, clear his name, and turn yourself in. Do that, and this evidence never sees the light of day." Sokolov's eyes narrowed. "And if I refuse? Then by this time tomorrow, every news outlet in the country will have copies of these files." "Your choice, Mr. Sokolov." For a moment, Sarah thought he might lunge across the table, but then, surprisingly, a smile crept across his face. It was not a pleasant expression. "Well played, Mrs. Thompson. I underestimated you. But remember this, you're playing a very dangerous game, one that doesn't end just because you've won this round." With that ominous warning, Sokolov stood and walked out of the cafe, leaving Sarah alone with her racing thoughts. The next few hours passed in a blur. True to his word, or perhaps simply recognizing the precariousness of his position, Sokolov set the wheels in motion for Michael's release. Sarah could hardly believe it when Nikolai burst into her apartment, his face split in a wide grin. "It's happening," he said breathlessly. "They're processing his release now. Sarah, you did it." The reality of her success took a moment to sink in. After weeks of fear, struggle, and determination, it was finally over. Michael was coming home. As they raced to the prison where Michael was being held, Sarah's emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Joy, relief, exhaustion, all of it crashed over her in waves. But there was something else too, a nagging sense of unease she couldn't quite shake. Sokolov's parting words echoed in her mind. "You're playing a very dangerous game, one that doesn't end just because you've won this round." What did he mean? What larger forces had she inadvertently stumbled into? But all those worries faded away as the prison gates opened, and a familiar figure stepped out into the sunlight. Michael, looking thinner and more haggard than she remembered, but alive and free. Their embrace was fierce and desperate, months of separation and fear pouring out in a rush of tears and whispered words of love. As they clung to each other, Sarah knew that their ordeal wasn't truly over. There would be questions to answer, loose ends to tie up, and the lingering threat of whatever shadowy forces Sokolov had alluded to. But in that moment, with Michael safe in her arms, Sarah allowed herself to simply feel the joy of their reunion. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As they drove away from the prison, leaving behind the dark chapter of their lives, Sarah gazed out at the city that had become both her battleground and her proving ground. She was not the same woman who had arrived here, scared and out of her depth. She had been tested, pushed to her limits, and emerged stronger than she ever thought possible. The road ahead was uncertain, but Sarah Thompson was ready for whatever it might bring. She had fought for her family and won, and she would do it again in a heartbeat. As Sarah and Michael settled into the back seat of Nikolai's car, the initial euphoria of their reunion began to give way to a more complex array of emotions. Michael looked shell-shocked, his eyes darting around nervously, as if expecting to be snatched back into custody at any moment. Sarah held his hand tightly, trying to anchor him to this new reality of freedom. "I can't believe you're really here," Michael said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Sarah, what did you do?" Sarah exchanged a glance with Nikolai in the rearview mirror. How much should she reveal? The dangerous game she had played, the risks she had taken, would it only add to Michael's trauma? "It's a long story," she said carefully. "The important thing is that we proved your innocence. Sokolov confessed to framing you." Michael's eyes widened at the mention of Sokolov's name. "You confronted him? Sarah, do you have any idea how dangerous that man is?" "I'm beginning to understand," Sarah admitted, "but I had help. Nikolai here, and others. We uncovered evidence of Sokolov's crimes that went far beyond just your case." As they drove through the city streets, Sarah gave Michael a sanitized version of events, downplaying the more perilous aspects of her investigation. But she could see the worry lines deepening on his forehead as he listened. "This isn't over, is it?" he asked quietly. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Maybe not entirely, but we're together now. Whatever comes next, we'll face it as a family." Back at the small apartment that had been Sarah's base of operations, Michael sank onto the worn couch, looking overwhelmed. "I can't wrap my head around all of this," he said. "One minute I'm in a cell, convinced I'll never see you or Ethan again. And the next," his voice broke, and Sarah sat beside him, pulling him close. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're safe now. We're going home." But even as she said the words, Sarah knew it wouldn't be that simple. There were still loose ends to tie up, potential dangers lurking in the shadows. And Michael, the haunted look in his eyes told her that the scars of his imprisonment wouldn't fade overnight. Over the next few days, as they made preparations to return home, the full extent of the challenges ahead began to come into focus. Michael struggled with nightmares and anxiety attacks, flinching at sudden noises and growing tense in crowded spaces. Sarah did her best to comfort him, all while grappling with her own conflicting emotions: relief at having him back, worry for his mental state, and a gnawing fear about what the future might hold. Nikolai and Masha were invaluable during this time, helping to navigate the complex legal aftermath of Michael's release and keeping an ear to the ground for any potential backlash from Sokolov or his associates. "You need to be careful when you get back home," Masha warned during one of their final meetings. "Sokolov may be down, but he's not out. And there are bigger players involved who won't be happy about what you've uncovered." Sarah nodded, trying to ignore the chill that ran down her spine. "What do you suggest? Keep a low profile for a while. And if anything seems off, anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. You've made some powerful friends here, Sarah. We'll do what we can to protect you." As they prepared to board their flight home, Sarah found herself experiencing a strange mix of emotions. Part of her was desperate to return to the safety and familiarity of their life in the suburbs, to see Ethan and begin the process of healing as a family. But another part, a part she was almost afraid to acknowledge, felt a pang of regret at leaving behind the world of high-stakes intrigue she had been thrust into. The woman who had arrived in this country weeks ago, terrified and out of her depth, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, more confident, someone who had stared down corrupt businessmen and navigated international conspiracies. Could she simply go back to being a suburban mom and teacher after all of this? As if sensing her thoughts, Michael squeezed her hand. "You've changed," he said softly. Sarah met his gaze, seeing a mix of awe and concern in his eyes. "Is that a bad thing?" He shook his head. "No. You saved me, Sarah. You did something incredible. I hope you know that you don't have to be that person all the time. It's okay to just be you again." His words brought tears to her eyes, and she leaned into him, drawing comfort from his presence. "I'm not sure I know who just me is anymore," she admitted. "But I know that whatever comes next, I want to face it with." The flight home was long and tense, both of them jumping at every unexpected noise or movement. But as the plane touched down on familiar soil, Sarah felt some of the weight lift from her shoulders. They were home. They were safe. They could begin to heal. Ethan was waiting for them at the airport, his lanky frame practically vibrating with nervous energy. The moment he saw Michael, he broke into a run, colliding with his father in a fierce embrace. Sarah watched through tears as her two boys clung to each other, feeling a complex mix of joy, relief, and a touch of something almost like grief, mourning for the innocence they had all lost. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act. On the surface, they tried to return to normal life. Ethan went back to school. Sarah took a leave of absence from her teaching job to help Michael readjust. But underneath the veneer of normalcy, the tension lingered. Michael struggled with PTSD, often waking in the night drenched in sweat, convinced he was back in his cell. Sarah did her best to comfort him, all while battling her own nightmares, dreams where she was back in that foreign city, racing against time to save her family. They went to therapy, both individually and as a couple. Slowly, haltingly, they began to process the trauma they had endured. But even as they made progress, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. Every unexpected noise made her jump. Every strange car parked on their street sent her heart racing. She found herself constantly checking over her shoulder, half expecting to see one of Sokolov's men lurking in the shadows. It was during one of these moments of paranoia that Sarah made a decision. She couldn't live like this, constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. If there was still a threat out there, she needed to face it head-on. Late one night, after Michael and Ethan had gone to bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before she began to type. "Dear Masha, I hope this email finds you well. I know we agreed to keep communication to a minimum for safety reasons, but I can't shake the feeling that our ordeal isn't over. Is there any news on Sokolov or the larger conspiracy we uncovered? Have you been able to make any progress with the evidence we gathered? I hate to ask, but I need to know. Are we still in danger? Please, if you know anything, tell me. I can't keep living in fear like this. Thank you for everything, Sarah." As she hit send, Sarah felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. It was the same feeling she had experienced during her investigation, a mix of fear and exhilaration. The thrill of taking action rather than passively waiting for fate to unfold. She knew that by sending this email, she might be opening a door that could never be fully closed again. But as she looked around her quiet suburban kitchen, Sarah realized that she had already crossed a point of no return. The woman she had become during her fight to save Michael, resourceful, determined, unafraid to confront corruption and danger. That woman was now an integral part of her. Whatever came next, whether it was a return to normalcy or another plunge into the world of international intrigue, Sarah Thompson was ready to face it. She had fought for her family once. If necessary, she would do it again. As she closed her laptop and headed to bed, Sarah felt a sense of purpose settling over her. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She was done being a passive player in her own life story. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would meet them head-on, with the same courage and determination that had brought Michael home. Little did she know, Masha's response would arrive sooner than expected, bringing with it news that would once again turn Sarah's world upside down. The reply from Masha came just before dawn, its urgency evident in the timestamp and terse language. "Sarah, your instincts are correct. The situation has escalated. Sokolov was found dead in his cell yesterday. Apparent suicide, but I have my doubts. Key evidence has gone missing. There are whispers of a larger conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of government and industry. You and your family may be in danger. Trust no one. I'm working on securing safe passage for you. Be ready to move at a moment's notice. Stay vigilant. I'll be in touch soon." Sarah's blood ran cold as she read the message. Her hand shook as she deleted the email, her mind racing. Sokolov dead? Evidence missing? The implications were staggering. She glanced at the clock. 5:30 m.m. Michael and Ethan would be waking soon. How could she tell them that their newfound sense of security was about to be shattered once again? As if on cue, She heard movement from upstairs. Michael appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, eyes immediately alert as he took in her tense posture. "What's wrong?" he asked, moving to her side. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. "We need to talk. All of us, including Ethan." The next hour was a blur of tense explanations and hurried preparations. Ethan, still groggy from sleep, looked bewildered and scared as Sarah outlined the potential danger they were in. Michael's face grew increasingly grim as he absorbed the implications of Masha's message. "We should go to the police," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes. "And tell them what?" She countered gently. "That we're being threatened by a conspiracy we can't prove, involving people we can't name. We don't know who we can trust, Michael." As they debated their options, a sharp knock at the door made them all freeze. Sarah's heart pounded as she approached, peering through the peephole. A wave of relief washed over her as she recognized Elena's face. But as she opened the door, the look of fear in Elena's eyes sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through her system. "You need to leave now," Elena said without preamble, pushing past Sarah into the house. "There are men watching your house. I don't think they've seen me, but it's only a matter of time." The next few minutes were a whirlwind of activity, guided by Elena's urgent instructions. They grabbed essential documents and a few changes of clothes, stuffing everything into backpacks. Sarah's mind was spinning, trying to process the sudden shift from suburban normalcy to fugitive status. "Where will we go?" Ethan asked, his voice small and scared. Elena handed Sarah a set of car keys. "Take my car. It's parked 2 blocks over. I've written down an address. It's a safe house Nikolay set up before you left. Go there and wait for further instructions." As they prepared to slip out the back door, Sarah turned to Elena. "Why are you doing this?" "You're putting yourself in danger." Elena's smile was sad but determined. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because, well, let's just say I have my own reasons for wanting to see this conspiracy exposed. Now go. Be safe." With final, hurried hugs, the Thompson family slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah's heart raced as they made their way to Elena's car, every shadow seeming to hide potential threats. As they pulled away from their neighborhood, Sarah caught a glimpse of unfamiliar vehicles parked on their street. Elena had been right. They were being watched. The drive to the safe house was tense, filled with furtive glances in the rearview mirror and hushed conversations. Ethan, in the back seat, looked shell-shocked, while Michael's jaw was set in a grim line. "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly as they navigated unfamiliar roads. "I thought it was over. I never meant to put you in danger again." Michael reached over, squeezing her hand. "This isn't your fault, Sarah. You saved me. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The safe house turned out to be a small, nondescript cabin on the outskirts of a rural town. As they pulled up, Sarah half expected to see more mysterious vehicles or shadowy figures. But the area seemed deserted, the only sound the chirping of early morning birds. Inside, they found basic provisions and a burner phone with a single number programmed into it. As they settled in, the adrenaline of their escape began to wear off, replaced by a heavy blanket of uncertainty. "What do we do now?" Ethan asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "We wait, and we plan. This isn't over, not by a long shot. But we're together, and we're safe for now. That's what matters." As the sun rose over their temporary refuge, Sarah found herself standing by the window, watching the interplay of light and shadow in the surrounding woods. She thought about the path that had led them here, from suburban comfort to international intrigue, from fear and separation to reunion and renewed danger. Part of her longed for the simplicity of their old life, but a larger part, the part that had faced down Sokolov, that had navigated conspiracy and corruption, knew there was no going back. They had stumbled upon something bigger than themselves, and now they had a responsibility to see it through. Michael joined her at the window, wrapping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking?" Sarah leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. "I'm thinking that we have a choice to make. We can keep running, always looking over our shoulders, never knowing when or if this will end. Or, Michael prompted, or we can fight back. Use what we know, find allies, and expose this conspiracy once and for all." Michael was quiet for a long moment, considering. When he spoke, his voice was resolute. "It won't be easy, and it'll be dangerous." Sarah nodded. "I know, but I don't think I can live with myself if we don't try. Not after everything we've been through." As they stood there, watching the new day dawn, Sarah felt a sense of purpose settling over her. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and unknown challenges. But they had each other, and they had the truth on their side. Whatever came next, Sarah Thompson was ready. She had fought for her family once, venturing into a world of corruption and conspiracy. Now, it was time to finish what she had started. The burner phone buzzed, startling them both. A text message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Are you ready to go down the rabbit hole? There's no turning back after this." Sarah looked at Michael, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. With a deep breath, she typed her response. "We're ready. What's our next move?" As she hit send, Sarah knew that their lives would never be the same. The suburban teacher and software engineer were gone, replaced by reluctant warriors in a battle against forces they were only beginning to understand. But as she looked at Michael and Ethan, Sarah felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. They were her family, her reason for fighting, and she would do whatever it took to keep them safe and bring the truth to light. The phone buzzed again, this time with a longer message. Instructions, coordinates, and a cryptic warning. As Sarah read it aloud, she could feel the energy in the room shift. This was it, the beginning of a new chapter in their extraordinary journey. "All right," she said, looking at her family with a mix of determination and apprehension. "Let's do this." As they began to prepare for their next move, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. From a desperate phone call in the middle of the night to international espionage and government conspiracies. It was almost too much to believe. But belief, Sarah had learned, was a powerful thing. She believed in her family, in justice, and in the power of truth to overcome even the darkest of secrets. And with those beliefs to guide her, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The safe house buzzed with activity as they made their preparations. A new chapter was beginning, one that would test them in ways they could scarcely imagine. But they would face it together, united by love, truth, and an unwavering determination to see justice done. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Sarah Thompson stepped out of the safe house, her family by her side, ready to take on the world. The suburban mom turned international whistleblower was about to write her own legend, and nothing would ever be the same again. The coordinates led them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of a small industrial town. As they approached in their nondescript rental car, Sarah's nerves were on high alert, every shadow potentially hiding a threat. "Are you sure about this?" Michael asked, his knuckles wide on the steering wheel. Sarah nodded, her jaw set. "We've come too far to turn back now." As they pulled up to the warehouse, a figure emerged from the shadows. Sarah's hand instinctively tightened on the door handle, ready to flee if necessary. But as the person stepped into the light, she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Nikolai?" she called out, hardly believing her eyes. The man grinned, his familiar face a welcome sight in the sea of uncertainty. "Surprised to see me? I couldn't let you have all the fun." As they gathered inside the warehouse, Nikolai quickly brought them up to speed. The conspiracy they had stumbled upon went deeper than they could have imagined, reaching into the highest echelons of government and industry. Sokolov was just a pawn, Nikolai explained, spreading out documents on a makeshift table. He was silenced because he knew too much, but his death has created an opportunity. The power players are scrambling, making mistakes. If we move quickly, we might be able to expose the whole operation. Sarah leaned in, studying the complex web of connections Nikolai had mapped out. Names she recognized from international news mingled with shadowy organizations and cryptic codenames. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" Michael asked, his face pale in the dim light. Nikolai's expression turned grim. "A global network of corruption, industrial espionage, money laundering, political manipulation. It's all connected. And at the center of it all is a project called Chimera. Chimera. Ethan piped up, his curiosity momentarily overcoming his fear. Like the mythological creature, Nikolai nodded approvingly. Exactly. Multiple parts forming a terrifying whole. In this case, it's a plan to manipulate global markets and political systems on an unprecedented scale. As Nikolai outlined the details of Chimera, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The scope of what they were up against was staggering, but mixed with her fear was a growing sense of determination. They had a chance to make a real difference, to expose a conspiracy that affected millions of lives. "So what's our move?" she asked, straightening up. "How do we bring this to light?" Nikolai's eyes gleamed with a mix of admiration and caution. "It won't be easy. We'll need to gather concrete evidence, find whistleblowers willing to come forward, and we'll have to do it all while staying one step ahead of some very dangerous people." Michael cleared his throat, his expression conflicted. "Is this really our fight? We're not spies or investigators. Maybe we should leave this to the authorities." Sarah turned to him, understanding his hesitation but feeling a fire burning within her. "We're already involved, Michael. They came after our family. And now that we know what's at stake, how can we walk away?" For a long moment, Michael was silent. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You're right. I'm scared, Sarah, for all of us." She reached out, squeezing his hand. "I'm scared too, but we're stronger together. And we have help." As if on cue, the warehouse door opened and two more figures stepped inside. Sarah recognized Mishai immediately, the journalist's fierce determination evident in her stride. But it was the woman beside her that made Sarah gasp. "Elena? What are you doing here?" Elena's smile was tinged with sadness. "I told you, I had my own reasons for wanting to see this conspiracy exposed. It's time I shared my full story with you." Over the next hour, Elena revealed a past Sarah could hardly have imagined. She had once been a high-ranking analyst in the Russian intelligence community, privy to secrets that would shake the foundations of global power structures. But when she discovered evidence of widespread corruption, she made the difficult choice to defect, fleeing to America with a treasure trove of classified information. "I've been waiting for the right moment, the right allies, to put this information to use," Elena explained. "When I met you, Sarah, and saw your determination to save Michael, I knew I had found the partners I needed." As the group huddled around the table, piecing together the puzzle of Chimera with Elena's insider knowledge, Sarah felt a surreal sense of displacement. How had she gone from grading English papers to plotting to expose a global conspiracy? But looking around at the determined faces of her unlikely allies, she knew there was nowhere else she'd rather be. The plan they formulated was daring, perhaps even reckless. Using Elena's contacts and Masse's journalistic connections, they would orchestrate a coordinated release of information, timed to coincide with a major international economic summit. The evidence would be impossible to ignore, forcing world leaders to confront the corruption in their midst. But as they worked out the details, a sobering realization settled over the group. This wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. By taking on Chimera, they were painting targets on their backs. "Once we do this, there's no going back," Nikolai warned. "We'll be in danger for the rest of our lives." Sarah looked at Michael and Ethan, seeing the fear in their eyes, but also a steely resolve. They had come too far to turn back now. "We understand the risks," she said, speaking for her family. "But this is bigger than us. It's about doing what's right, no matter the cost." As the others nodded in agreement, Sarah felt a profound shift in her sense of self. The suburban mom who had embarked on this journey to save her husband was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to take on the world's most powerful and corrupt forces, driven by an unshakable belief in justice and truth. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Safe houses became command centers, filled with computers, encrypted communication devices, and walls covered in complex diagrams. Sarah threw herself into the work, her teacher's eye for detail proving invaluable as they pieced together the evidence. Michael's software skills came into play as they worked to secure their communications and protect their digital trail. Even Ethan found a role, his youthful perspective offering fresh insights and his knack for social media, helping to lay the groundwork for their information release. But as they drew closer to their target date, the danger intensified. Twice they had to relocate in the middle of the night, tipped off by Alana's contacts about impending raids. Sarah lost count of the number of times she jolted awake, heart pounding, certain she had heard an intruder. Through it all, the bond between the unlikely team grew stronger. They shared meals and late-night strategy sessions, swapped stories of their lives before this madness, and found moments of laughter even in the midst of their high-stakes mission. One night, as they took a rare moment to relax, Masha raised a glass in a toast to the most unlikely group of world savers I've ever met. She said with a wry smile, "May we change the world or die trying." The humor was dark, but it spoke to the gravity of their situation. They all knew the risks, knew that their actions could cost them everything. But as Sarah looked around at the faces of her companions, her family both old and new, she felt a sense of purpose that overshadowed her fear. As the day of their planned revelation approached, the tension ratcheted up to almost unbearable levels. Final preparations were made, contingency plans put in place. Sarah found herself oscillating between nervous excitement and paralyzing fear. The night before their move, she stood outside their latest safe house, staring up at the stars. Michael joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Having second thoughts?" he asked softly. Sarah leaned into him, drawing comfort from his presence. "No," she said after a moment. "I'm scared, of course, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. This is what we're meant to do." Michael nodded, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "You've amazed me every step of this journey, Sarah. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that." As they stood there under the vast expanse of the night sky, Sarah thought about the incredible path that had led them to this moment. From a desperate phone call in the middle of the night to the brink of exposing a global conspiracy, it was almost too much to comprehend. But as the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, Sarah felt a sense of calm settle over her. They had truth on their side and a team of dedicated allies. Whatever challenges the day might bring, they would face them together. "It's time," she said softly, squeezing Michael's hand. As they walked back into the house to join the others, Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The suburban teacher turned international whistleblower was about to step onto the world stage, armed with nothing but the truth and an unwavering determination to see justice done. The final act of their extraordinary journey was about to begin. As the sun rose on the day of their planned revelation, the safe house buzzed with tense energy. Each member of their unlikely team moved with purpose, double-checking equipment and running through their roles one last time. Sarah stood at the center of it all, a calm eye in the storm of activity. She watched as Masha coordinated with her network of journalists, ensuring that their evidence would reach every major news outlet simultaneously. Nikolai and Elena huddled over encrypted communications, verifying that their whistleblower sources were in place and protected. Michael caught her eye from across the room, giving her a reassuring nod as he finished setting up their secure broadcast equipment. Even Ethan was fully engaged, his fingers flying over a keyboard as he prepared to launch their social media blitz. As the appointed hour drew near, Sarah gathered everyone for a final briefing. Looking at the determined faces around her, she felt a surge of pride and gratitude. "We all know what's at stake here," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "What we're about to do will shake the foundations of power structures around the world. There will be pushback, denial, and attempts to discredit us. But we have the truth on our side." She paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. "No matter what happens next, I want you all to know how grateful I am. We started this journey as strangers, brought together by circumstance. Now, I can't imagine facing this without each one of you." Nikolai cleared his throat, his usual gruff demeanor softening for a moment. "It has been an honor, Sarah. You've shown more courage than many seasoned operatives I've known." Masha nodded in agreement. "You've given us a chance to make a real difference. Whatever comes next, we face it together." As the others murmured their agreement, Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. This disparate group had become a family of sorts, united by their shared mission and the bonds forged in the face of danger. With a deep breath, she squared her shoulders. All right then, let's change the world. The next hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. At precisely noon, their carefully orchestrated plan sprang into action. Encrypted files were transmitted to journalists around the globe. Social media exploded with hashtags and leaked documents. And at the center of it all, a live broadcast featuring Sarah, flanked by Elena and Masha, laying out the full scope of the Chimera conspiracy. As Sarah spoke, her voice clear and unwavering, she could almost feel the shockwaves rippling out across the world. She detailed the web of corruption, named names, and presented irrefutable evidence of wrongdoing at the highest levels of government and industry. This isn't about politics or national interests, she said, looking directly into the camera. This is about the fundamental principles of justice and transparency. The people behind Chimera have manipulated global markets, influenced elections, and caused untold suffering in pursuit of their own power and wealth. Today, we say, no more. As the broadcast continued, reports began flooding in from around the world. Stock markets plummeted as implicated companies saw their shares nosedive. Political leaders named in the expose were already facing calls for resignation. The hashtag Chimera Truth was trending globally. But even as they watched their plan unfold with stunning effectiveness, a sense of unease began to creep over the group. They had known there would be pushback, but the speed and intensity of the response was alarming. Nikolai burst into the room, his face grim. We've got incoming. Multiple vehicles, heavily armed. We need to move, now. The safe house erupted into frantic activity. Hard drives were wiped, equipment destroyed, and go bags grabbed. As they prepared to split up into pre-arranged groups, Sarah pulled Ethan close. Remember the plan? She said urgently. Go with Elena. She keep you safe. Your father and I will meet you at the rendezvous. Ethan's eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded bravely. Be careful, Mom. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. Stay strong. As Elena ushered Ethan out through a hidden exit, Sarah turned to Michael. The look they shared spoke volumes. Fear, love, determination. Ready? She asked. Michael took her hand, squeezing it tightly. Together, they slipped out into the chaos of the streets, the sound of sirens growing closer. Sarah's heart pounded as they wove through back alleys and crowded marketplaces, using every evasion tactic Nikolai had drilled into them. But as they turned a corner, they found their path blocked by a group of men in dark suits. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized one of them, a high-ranking official they had named in their expose. Mrs. Thompson, the man said, his voice cold. I'm afraid your little crusade ends here. Michael stepped in front of Sarah protectively, but she gently moved him aside. Standing tall, she faced their adversaries. You're wrong, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. This isn't the end. It's only the beginning. The truth is out there now, and you can't stop it. The official's eyes narrowed. Perhaps, but we can certainly stop you. Just as the tension reached a breaking point, the air was filled with the sound of screeching tires. A van careened around the corner, and Sarah recognized Nikolai behind the wheel. Get in, he shouted. Without hesitation, Sarah and Michael sprinted for the van, diving inside as bullets began to fly. Nikolai floored the accelerator, and they tore away from the scene, leaving their pursuers in the dust. As they sped through the city, weaving through traffic with alarming skill, Sarah allowed herself a moment to breathe. They had done it. The truth was out. But their fight was far from over. Where to now? Michael asked, his voice tight with tension. Nikolai's eyes met Sarah's in the rearview mirror. We've got a long road ahead. Are you ready? Sarah reached for Michael's hand, intertwining their fingers. She thought of Ethan, praying he was safe with Elena. She thought of the millions of people around the world who were, at this very moment, learning the truth they had fought so hard to reveal. I'm ready, she said firmly, whatever it takes. As the van sped towards an uncertain future, Sarah Thompson, once a simple suburban teacher, now at the heart of a global revolution, felt a fierce determination settle over her. The world had changed today, and she had been the catalyst. There was no going back now. The chase continued through winding streets and narrow alleys. Nikolai's driving skills pushed to their limits. Sarah's mind raced, trying to process the whirlwind of events. Had their message truly gotten out? Were people believing it? And most pressingly, was Ethan safe? As if reading her thoughts, Michael squeezed her hand. "He's okay," he said softly. "Elena will protect him." Sarah nodded, drawing strength from Michael's certainty. She had to believe that Ethan was safe, that all of this hadn't been for nothing. Suddenly, Nikolai cursed in Russian, swerving sharply. "We've got company," he growled, nodding towards the rearview mirror. Sarah twisted in her seat, her heart sinking as she saw the sleek black vehicles gaining on them. "Can we lose them?" Nikolai's grim smile was not reassuring. "We can try." What followed was a heart-stopping chase through the city. Nikolai's van, sturdy but cumbersome, was no match for their pursuers' high-performance vehicles. But what they lacked in speed, they made up for in Nikolai's seemingly supernatural ability to anticipate their opponent's moves. They weaved through traffic, took hairpin turns down narrow side streets, and at one point even drove through a busy marketplace, sending stalls and shoppers scattering. Throughout it all, Sarah clung to Michael, her mind racing to formulate a plan. "We can't keep this up forever," she said, raising her voice to be heard over the screeching tires and blaring horns. "We need to find a way to disappear." Nikolai nodded grimly. "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Nikolai made a sharp turn, heading straight for the river that cut through the city. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized his intent. "Nikolai, no!" she shouted, but it was too late. With a final burst of speed, Nikolai drove the van off the embankment and into the murky water below. The impact was jarring, knocking the breath from Sarah's lungs. Water began to pour in through every crack and crevice. "Out!" Nikolai commanded, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Swim down and away. Don't surface until you're sure it's clear." Sarah didn't hesitate. Years of summer swim lessons kicked in as she took a deep breath and plunged into the cold, dirty water. She felt Michael's presence beside her as they swam deeper, letting the current carry them away from the sinking van. Her lungs burned, screaming for air, but Sarah pushed on. She thought of Ethan, of the truth they had fought so hard to reveal. She couldn't give up now. Finally, when she felt her body would betray her at any moment, Sarah allowed herself to surface. She gasped for air, blinking river water from her eyes as she looked around frantically. "Michael!" she called out, her voice hoarse. "Here!" came his reply, and she almost sobbed with relief as she saw him treading water a few feet away. Nikolai surfaced moments later, looking grim but unharmed. They swam to the shore, collapsing on the muddy bank. In the distance, they could hear sirens and shouting, but for the moment, they seemed to have lost their pursuers. "What now?" Michael asked, still catching his breath. Sarah pushed herself to her feet, offering a hand to help the others up. "We keep moving. We find Ethan and Elena, and we make sure the truth we revealed today doesn't get buried." As they made their way through the shadows of the city, dirty and exhausted but unbroken, Sarah felt a fierce pride in what they had accomplished. They had taken on the most powerful forces in the world, and, against all odds, had made their voices heard. But she knew this was only the beginning. The Chimera conspiracy had been exposed, but its architects would not go down without a fight. There would be denials, cover-ups, and undoubtedly attempts to discredit or silence them. Yet, as Sarah looked at Michael, saw the determination in Nikolai's eyes, and thought of Elena and Ethan waiting for them, she knew they were equal to the challenge. They had started this journey as ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Now, they were freedom fighters, truth-tellers, the spark that could ignite a global movement for transparency and justice. Whatever trials lay ahead, Sarah Thompson was ready to face them. She had found a strength within herself she never knew existed, a purpose that transcended her former life. The suburban teacher had become a warrior for truth, and there was no turning back. As they disappeared into the night, blending into the shadows of the city they had shaken to its core, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The world had changed today, and she, Sarah Thompson, had been the one to change it. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since this journey began, Sarah felt truly, unshakably certain they would win. As the adrenaline of their narrow escape began to fade, the reality of their situation set in. Sarah, Michael, and Nikolai were now fugitives, cut off from their resources and allies, in a city that was undoubtedly swarming with people looking for them. "We need to find somewhere to regroup," Sarah said, her teeth chattering slightly from the cold river water that still clung to her clothes. "Preferably somewhere we can get dry and figure out our next move." Nikolai nodded, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "I know a place. It's not far, and it should be safe for a few hours at least." As they made their way through back alleys and dimly lit streets, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how much her life had changed. Just months ago, her biggest concern had been planning the next school fundraiser. Now, she was at the center of a global conspiracy, running for her life after exposing corruption at the highest levels. The safe house Nikolai led them to turned out to be a small, run-down apartment above a noisy bar. The furnishings were sparse, but there were dry clothes and basic supplies. As they changed and tried to warm up, Sarah's mind was racing. "We need to contact Elena and Ethan," she said, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "And Mashai, we need to know what's happening out there." Michael put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We will, but we need to be smart about it. Using any of our known communication channels could lead them right to us." Nikolai emerged from the tiny bathroom, his hair still damp, but looking more like his usual composed self. "I have a secure line we can use. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing." As Nikolai set up the communication device, Sarah paced the small room, her nervous energy palpable. Michael watched her with a mix of concern and admiration. "You know," he said softly, "I always knew you were strong. But what you've done, what you're still doing, it's incredible, Sarah." She paused, looking at him with a small smile. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. Without all of you." Their moment was interrupted by Nikolai's gruff voice. "I've got a connection. It's Elena." Sarah rushed over, her heart in her throat as she took the secure phone. "Elena, are you all right? Is Ethan safe?" "We're fine," Elena's voice came through, tinged with static but unmistakably relieved. "We made it to the secondary safe house. Ethan's been worried sick about you too." Sarah felt tears prick in her eyes as she heard Ethan's voice in the background, demanding to know if his parents were okay. "Tell him we're fine," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll be together soon, I promise." As Elena filled them in on their situation, Nikolai worked on establishing a connection with Masha. When he finally got through, the journalist's voice was filled with barely contained excitement. "You did it," Masha said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The Chimera files are everywhere. Every major news outlet is covering it. Governments are in chaos. Corporations are scrambling. It's a global earthquake, and you're at the epicenter." Sarah listened, a mix of pride and trepidation washing over her. They had succeeded in their mission to expose the truth, but at what cost? "What about the pushback?" Michael asked, voicing Sarah's unspoken concern. "Are they trying to discredit the information?" Masha's laugh was humorless. "Oh, they're trying, but the evidence is too strong, too comprehensive. They're resorting to attacking the messengers now, which means you're all in serious danger." As Masha outlined the global reaction to their revelations, Sarah's mind was already working on their next steps. They had lit the fuse, but the real explosion was yet to come. They needed to ensure that the truth they had fought so hard to reveal didn't get buried in the chaos that followed. "We need to keep the pressure on," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "Find more whistleblowers, release follow-up information. We can't let them regain control of the narrative." Nikolai nodded approvingly. "I have some contacts who might be willing to come forward now that the initial blast has happened. But it won't be easy. The people behind Chimera will be out for blood." As they began to formulate a plan, a sudden noise from outside the apartment made them all freeze. Heavy footsteps on the stairs, voices speaking in low, urgent tones. "We've been found," Nikolai said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to move now." What followed was a heart-stopping escape that pushed them all to their limits. They slipped out through a hidden passage Nikolai had prepared, emerging into a maze of back alleys and secret pathways that seemed to exist in a shadow version of the city. As they ran, ducking and weaving to avoid detection. Sarah's mind was racing. How had they been found so quickly? Was there a leak in their network? Or were the forces arrayed against them simply that powerful? They finally lost their pursuers in a crowded marketplace, blending in with the throng of shoppers and vendors. As they caught their breath in the shelter of a small cafe, Sarah knew they needed a new strategy. "We can't keep running forever," she said, her voice low but intense. "We need to go on the offensive." Michael looked at her with a mix of concern and admiration. "What are you thinking?" Sarah's eyes gleamed with determination. "We've exposed the conspiracy, but the people behind it are still in the shadows. It's time to drag them into the light." Over strong coffee and hushed conversations, they began to formulate a daring plan. Using the intelligence they had gathered and the network of allies they had built, they would orchestrate a series of coordinated moves designed to flush out the key players behind Chimera. It was risky, potentially suicidal, but as Sarah looked at the determined faces of her companions, she knew they were all in. "This isn't just about us anymore," she said, her voice filled with purpose. "It's about everyone who's ever been victimized by corruption and greed. It's about creating a world where the truth matters." As they fine-tuned their plan, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. She had started as a suburban teacher, thrust into a world of international intrigue by a desperate need to save her husband. Now, she stood at the forefront of a global movement for truth and justice. The dangers ahead were immense. The forces arrayed against them were powerful and ruthless. But Sarah Thompson was no longer afraid. She had found a strength within herself that she never knew existed, a purpose that transcended her former life. As they prepared to put their audacious plan into action, Sarah thought of Ethan, safely hidden away with Elena. She thought of all the other families out there, unknowing victims of the Chimera conspiracy. She thought of a world where corruption could no longer hide in the shadows. "Are we ready for this?" Michael asked, his hand finding hers under the table. Sarah squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his presence. She looked at Nikolai, saw the same fierce determination mirrored in his eyes. "We're ready," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Let's finish what we started." As they rose from the table, preparing to step back into the fray, Sarah felt a sense of clarity she had never experienced before. The path ahead was dangerous, uncertain, but she knew with unshakable certainty that it was the right one. The suburban teacher had become a warrior for truth, a catalyst for global change. And Sarah Thompson was just getting started. Little did they know, their next move would shake the very foundations of power across the world, setting in motion a chain of events that would change the course of history forever. As Sarah, Michael, and Nikolai set their plan into motion, the world around them was in a state of unprecedented turmoil. The Chimera files had ignited a global firestorm, with protests erupting in major cities, governments in crisis, and the stock market in free fall. Their strategy was bold and multifaceted. Using Masha's journalistic network, they began releasing a steady stream of follow-up information, each revelation designed to keep the scandal in the public eye and prevent any attempt at a cover-up. Meanwhile, Elena and her intelligence contacts worked tirelessly to identify and reach out to potential whistleblowers within the organizations implicated in the Chimera conspiracy. But the centerpiece of their plan was perhaps the most audacious move yet. Using the evidence they had gathered, they planned to lure the key architects of Chimera into a trap, forcing them into the open where they could be exposed and brought to justice. As they worked, moving from safe house to safe house, Sarah found herself transforming once again. The initial fear and uncertainty had been replaced by a steely resolve. She was no longer just reacting to events. She was shaping them. "We've got movement," Nikolai announced one tense evening, his eyes fixed on his secure laptop. "Our bait has been taken. The top echelon of Chimera is planning an emergency meeting to deal with the fallout." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. This was what they had been waiting for. Where? A private estate outside the city. Heavily guarded, but not impenetrable, Michael finished, a glint of excitement in his eyes. The next 48 hours were a blur of frantic preparation. They coordinated with Masha to ensure media presence, worked with Elena to position their allies, and fine-tuned every aspect of their plan. As the appointed hour approached, Sarah found a moment of quiet to call Ethan. Hearing his voice, a mix of worry and pride, brought tears to her eyes. "Mom, are you really going to catch the bad guys?" he asked, his voice small but filled with hope. Sarah swallowed hard. "We're gonna try, sweetheart. Your dad and I, we're doing this for you, for everyone, to make the world a little bit better." "I know," Ethan said softly. "I'm scared, but I'm proud of you, Mom." Those words, so simple yet so powerful, steeled Sarah's resolve. As she hung up, she knew with absolute certainty that what they were doing was right, no matter the cost. The night of the operation was clear and cool, the stars shining brightly above the sprawling estate where the Chimera leadership had gathered. Sarah, Michael, and Nikolai approached under the cover of darkness, their hearts pounding but their movements sure. Years of corruption and deceit had made the Chimera leaders complacent. They never expected to be confronted in their own stronghold. The shock on their faces as Sarah and her team burst into their meeting, flanked by a cadre of international law enforcement officers, was almost comical. "Gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice steady and clear, "your time is up." What followed was a chaotic blur of action. Some tried to flee, others to destroy evidence, but it was too late. The trap had been sprung perfectly. As dawn broke, the full impact of their operation became clear. Dozens of high-ranking officials and corporate leaders were in custody. Terabytes of incriminating data had been seized. And most importantly, the truth was out, undeniable and uncontainable. Sarah stood on the lawn of the estate, watching as the arrested conspirators were led away. Michael came up beside her, taking her hand. "We did it," he said softly, a note of awe in his voice. Sarah nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions: relief, pride, exhaustion, and a tinge of sadness for the innocents they had lost along the way. "It's not over," she said. "There will be trials, investigations. The system that allowed Chimera to exist in the first place is still out there." "True," Nikolai said, joining them. "But today, we've struck a blow for justice that will resonate for years to come. You should be proud, Sarah. You've changed the world." As the sun rose higher, casting a golden light over the scene, Sarah allowed herself to truly feel the weight of what they had accomplished. From a desperate phone call in the middle of the night to this moment of triumph, it had been a journey beyond anything she could have imagined. The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. There were debriefings with authorities, endless interviews with journalists, and emotional reunions with family and friends. Sarah, Michael, and their allies were hailed as heroes by some, vilified by others, but no one could deny the impact of what they had done. As the dust began to settle, Sarah found herself standing at a crossroads. The quiet life she had once known was gone forever, but in its place was a world of possibility, a chance to continue making a difference on a global scale. "What do we do now?" Michael asked one evening as they sat in the backyard of their old home, finally safe enough to return. Sarah looked up at the stars, thinking of all they had been through, all they had learned. "We keep going," she said softly. "There's still so much work to be done, other conspiracies to uncover, other injustices to fight." Michael squeezed her hand. "Together?" "Always," Sarah replied with a smile. In the years that followed, Sarah Thompson became a symbol of courage and integrity in a world hungry for both. She and Michael, along with their allies, founded an international organization dedicated to exposing corruption and promoting transparency in governments and corporations around the world. Ethan grew up watching his parents change the world, inspired by their courage and determination. The lessons he learned from their extraordinary journey shaped him into a passionate advocate for truth and justice in his own right. There were hard times, of course, threats, setbacks, moments of doubt. But through it all, Sarah held on to the strength she had discovered within herself during that first desperate fight to save her family. On the 10th anniversary of the Chimera Expos, Sarah stood before a crowd of thousands, her family and friends by her side. As she looked out at the sea of faces, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. 10 years ago, we took a stand, she began, her voice carrying across the hushed audience. We said no to corruption, no to deceit, no to the idea that ordinary people are powerless in the face of global conspiracies. Today, I stand before you not as a hero, but as a reminder that each of us has the power to make a difference, to stand up for what's right, to change the world. As applause erupted, Sarah felt Michael's arm around her waist, saw Ethan's beaming face in the front row. She thought of Nikolai, Alana, Mashai, and all the others who had fought alongside them. She thought of the long journey that had brought her to this moment, and the road that still lay ahead. Sarah Thompson, once a simple suburban teacher, had become a beacon of hope in a troubled world. But more than that, she had become the person she was always meant to be: brave, resilient, and unwavering in her commitment to the truth. As she left the stage, hand in hand with Michael, Sarah knew that their greatest adventures still lay ahead. The world was far from perfect, but as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, there was hope. And Sarah Thompson would always be there, leading the charge, showing the world that one person, one family, one moment of courage could spark a revolution. The suburban mom turned global icon smiled as she looked towards the future. The journey that had begun with a desperate phone call had led her here, to a life of purpose and impact beyond her wildest dreams. And she wouldn't have it any. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings!